All right, so let's talk about the Concealed Carry Improvement Act. So I have this series on Instagram at Newbie Gun Guy um, that I call "Illegal in New York Part Infinity." That's an homage to Geo, if you know him. But so it's basically the fact that a lot of guns are illegal in New York. New York is not an hospitable place for 2A life. But let's talk about the CCIA for a second, because the Bruin case said that keeping and bearing meant you have a right, a constitutional right, to carry outside the home. It overturned a New York law that had been on the books for about 100 years, called the Sullivan Act, which set up an entire licensing scheme, which essentially gave government officials the power to deny licensing at their discretion. And they exercised that discretion in the vast majority of cases. The average citizen could not get a carry license. And the CC and so Bruin overturned that, and Governor Hochul pulled the legislature back into session. They were on recess, and a week later they came out with the Concealed Carry Improvement Act. The Concealed Carry Improvement Act there are a lot of lawsuits right now. Antonio, which is probably the main one. There are a couple others which I'm following, challenging different provisions of the law. The Concealed Carry Improvement Act did a bunch of things. It created a lot of sensitive locations where you can't carry guns, and that included and restricted locations, and it basically includes all private property unless the owner posts a sign that says it's okay, and a whole lot of other just types of places, parks, movie theaters, stadiums, all of Times Square. There's a large swath of New York, and the great quote from Governor Hochul was that, when can you, where can you carry after this? And she said, well, basically on some streets. So let's talk about that for a second, because each of the lawsuits that's out there challenge different provisions of the law. So parks, you have somebody who signs an affidavit saying, I'm going to carry in a park, and that subjects me to prosecution, and that prosecution would be unconstitutional. So the parks part of the law is unconstitutional. And then you have another person who says, oh, well, I want to go into a movie theater, and they sign an affidavit saying, I'm going to go into a movie theater carrying a gun, and that's going to subject me to prosecution. That prosecution is against the Second Amendment. Therefore, I have standing to challenge the law, and they challenge that part of the law. What I want to do is zoom out for a second and say, look at the CCIA as a whole and what it was designed to do, right? So you take an average, suburban New Yorker who takes a car to the train, takes the Long Island Railroad or New Jersey Transit or the Metro North, comes into the city. They go into Grand Central. They go into Penn Station. They then take a New York City subway and go however long they have to travel on the subway to get to their stop. Then they get out. They go into a bodega. They buy bacon, egg, and cheese on a roll, coffee regular because it's New York. And then they go into work. They come out and they do the exact same thing in reverse. And maybe on Saturday or Sunday they go to church or synagogue and maybe go to a park with their kids. You can't do that carrying a gun. You are a felon in about 7 different ways if you do what I just said, and that is just normal everyday life. And what Bruin said was that people have a constitutional right to carry in their normal everyday life. And New York has made that impossible. So while I agree that each provision of the law should be challenged, I really wish that there were a way, or that somebody would argue that it's not just provisions of the law. The law as a whole is unconstitutional because it makes what the Supreme Court said is a protected right impossible, literally impossible, without becoming a felon in the state of New York. Certainly in the city of New York. So I think that we really should, the challenge should be broader than the individual challenges, because what's going on now is you have like 14, 15 different provisions of law, of which 8 are being challenged because they don't have a plaintiff that says, I'm going to go into a mental health institution, or I'm going to go, because that would disqualify you from probably having it all. I'm going to go into a hospital. They have to have a person who says, I'm going to do this, and they have to do it with specificity. And then even then, the state argues, oh, well, they're not really subject to prosecution because they haven't said an immediate desire to go, and therefore they don't have standing. And all of these state arguments against these lawsuits, they start with standing, and says that the person who's making this argument really isn't subject to the law. They're from Suffolk County, so they don't come into the city, and they haven't alleged that they're going to come into the city. Therefore, they can't challenge those parts. Or this person, the best was this person didn't actually apply because, let's face it, I never applied for a New York City permit because it was impossible. I knew I wasn't going to get it. It was futile. But of course, they said, since you didn't apply, you don't have standing to challenge the law. So at this point, basically, somebody's going to have to get arrested. It's not going to be me, but somebody's going to have to get arrested to challenge certain portions of the law. Because every time they argue that I intend to do this, the state argues lack of standing. So it's a mess. I think we are still in a transitional period. I think what's going to happen is that either Judge Sotheby or somebody else will overturn significant portions of the CCIA, and then the legislature, because they are controlled by anti-2A people, the legislature will come back and sort of do CCIA 2, which is, if the original CCIA says you can't do it here, then CCIA 2 is going to say you can't do it here, and it'll just be a slight improvement. And they'll say, oh, well, see, we fixed everything that Judge Sotheby said was wrong. And then that'll get challenged, and then they'll go here. So until finally, the Supreme Court should just spank the New York State legislature and Governor Hochul to begin with, and say, because the entire law was passed as a big middle finger to the Supreme Court, and it wasn't hidden. It's not like this was a dog whistle. They said it out loud. They said, we don't like what just happened in Bruin. We think that was an abuse of power, and it took away the state's rights to protect his people. So we're going to pass this law. It was a complete refutation and challenge to the authority of the Supreme Court to declare acts unconstitutional. So we'll see what happens. We probably another year before it all sort of shuffles out. Even Hochul said that she was going to take a step back on the places of worship with the latest budget, but last I heard, that wasn't actually going to happen. So we'll see how that works out. That they were going to do technical amendments to the CCIA, which basically took out an entire provision, which is you can't carry in places of worship. So we'll see what happens. I don't really think anything is, but it'll take a while. It'll take about a year. In the meantime, I turned in all my paperwork for my concealed carry permit about 2 months ago. So the guy that turned it in about a few weeks before me just got his, so I expect mine hopefully shortly. But we'll see, and then we'll take it from there. And I'll try and keep you a little bit updated.